Hi, everyone. I'm Corion, your witch in residence. And, I still have an extra week in October, and I want to do one of my favorite movies growing up. One of the ones that kind of dragged me kicking and screaming into goth culture and made me realize how wonderful it is. And to help me out, I decided to reach out to one of my very good friends. He's with me every Tuesday night on the Tuesday Night Writer Brothers show. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Poyo Zapatos. Hello, sir. How
Hi,
are you?
doing well. How are you, Corion?
I'm doing good. So, today I've decided we're going to take a look at The Crow.
Yeah, I'm
All right.
excited.
All right. Awesome. Now, as you know, as you've said many times you watch my show, so we have a little bit of a ritual to get into beforehand. Uh,
Absolutely.
Ladies and gentlemen, um, first, I want to thank you for showing up for this video, but more and more I am seeing that I'm getting a lot more views and a lot less subscribers from those views. So I'm hoping today is the day where this video earns a subscribe from you. A like and a share would be amazing too. The more people we get to like, share, and subscribe to my channel, the more we get the positive message I'm trying to feed out there into the internet to combat some of the rage and the hate out there. And the best way to do that is with love and common decency and respect. And that's what we do around here. So please, if you would consider giving a like, giving a share, giving a subscribe, it really helps the channel out. Now, with that obligatory ritual out of the way, let's start talking about The Crow. So, John, um, as we're both familiar with, The Crow is from 1994, stars Brandon Lee, and is actually one of the very first superhero films, really. Um, at least in the modern sense of what we would consider a superhero film.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if we consider all of the Marvel, like Hulk, the the Green Hulk, the one where they actually tried to have a dude painted green,
Yeah,
wasn't that
the Lou
older?
Ferrigno
Lou
Hulk.
Ferrigno, that was the one. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's like the early '70s, '80s, early attempts. But
Mm-hmm.
I think this is you could make a solid argument that between this and Blade is when we really start to see the modern superhero film come together.
Yeah, I feel like this one really showed that like all those comic books that kids were reading weren't just colorful pictures that made it like the old saying, you can't read a book unless it has pictures in it. And I think that's what a lot of people thought was going on in comics, but in reality comic books are a great way to help kids imagine entire universes, and The Crow proved that you could do that for adults as well.
Absolutely. Now, um, as you know, I always try to pick the right person for the right job when I'm co-hosting one of these. Um, and you actually have a unique connection to the writer
Yeah,
of this.
share the same birthday,
Yeah. Well,
November 10th, 1775.
well, there's also the fact that he was in the Marine Corps and he actually wrote this.
Oh, that's the birthday we share. That's the day the Marine Corps started.
Well, okay, fair enough. And on top of that too, he was actually writing it while he was still in. He was just my understanding is he was just going through a very messy end to a relationship. He was trying to get his feelings out. He worked on this a little bit and it sat on the shelf for years until it finally got picked up. And when it got picked up, it just kind of took off, and that's how the movie actually got started. Was how they
Yeah,
kind of put it all together.
so that's how I read it too, and it seems more like he had an idea for writing a comic book since being a kid who likes comic books. And as someone who served in the Marines, I can tell you there's a lot of time to do nothing except for write, because it's one of the few things you'll never get yelled at for. Like if you're on a 24-hour duty and you're sitting there writing, they always assume you're doing schoolwork, even if they have no idea what school you're going to, or you just literally only have a piece of paper and writing. Like they don't care. But like if you're on your phone, if you're reading a book, sometimes they'll let you pass with a book, but most times they won't. So like writing is one of the few things that you can do and never get in trouble for. And in that regard, I feel like that's something that led the author to creating this character, was like, because you can also draw a picture and just flip the page over when somebody walks in, right? And just pretend like you're writing, or just pretend like you have a loose leaf piece of paper.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really why a lot of Marines that do have some form of creativity, as soon as they get out and aren't afraid of getting yelled at, they take more time and invest in that art. And from what I read, the author, it's not that it sat on a shelf because of him. It seemed like he
No.
actually tried to find people that wanted it, but it took a while before. I think it was like a friend of a friend finally was like, oh yeah, we'll publish that.
Yeah, it always felt like to me, based on all the writing I've seen Marines do, both while in and then when they get out, it seems like the United States Marine Corps is determined to try to create warrior poets almost. Which I don't think is a bad thing necessarily.
Well, I don't know if it's just the Marine Corps, because the Navy's been doing the same thing with their SEALs. I think it's the warrior in general. Like one of the hardest things about being a Marine is like when you're in the Marines, everybody's a Marine. Everybody say hi to you. Like you're not cool because you're a Marine. But then when you go home, like everybody thinks you're cool. And so like you have to like combat that like humility, because there is an ego, and then you can bring that back to the like back to station, and you do that and you're going to get just railroaded. Like nobody's going to let you off pretending like you're the coolest thing when everybody knows you're not. Like people have seen your room, more people than you think. And I think that's like something that leads to the poetry, is like rather than being able to share all of your feelings about wanting to be a warrior and actually achieving such a deep like thing, you have to write it down, because anybody around you that wants to listen is either gonna like, oh, that's how crazy your life is, or yeah, but we did the exact same thing yesterday. But to you, you're like, yeah, but I could have never done this 10 years ago. I want to write
Mhm.
about it and get my feelings out. So I think the warrior poetry is mandatory, because other warriors will make fun of you and everybody else doesn't understand.
Fair. So, The Crow. For those who are not familiar with the plot, I think Rochelle Davis does an excellent job of setting up the story in her kind of opening monologue. That the basic premise is that when somebody dies a tragic death, they can a crow can bring them back from the dead to right the wrongs that happened in their life. And that's effectively what we see here. Um, on October 30th, um, he finds that Shelley Webster and Eric Draven have been brutally attacked and killed. Um, and after having been stabbed, shot, and thrown out the window, when the couple were planning on getting married on Halloween, um, a year later, Eric is brought back from the dead. He rises from the grave in a very incredible looking scene, really expertly shot too. Um, he comes back and he's guided by the crow to take vengeance on the group of men that attacked them, which, if I recall correctly, was Tintin, Funboy, Skank, and T-Bird is the leader. Believe it or not, I actually remember the movie that well to be able to say that. And Eric goes through and more or less takes them out one at a time. He tracks down the um let's see, who does he he attacks goes after Tintin first, if I remember right. He stabs him in every major bodily organ in alphabetical order. He goes
Right.
after the pawn shop where his fiance's engagement ring was sold, and destroys it but keeps the ring. Um, he goes after Fun Boy at the dealer's place. Um, he was hoping to get a twofer to get Skank as well at the same time, but didn't
Mm-hmm.
quite manage to get him. but he manages to force Fun Boy to OD.
Mm.
And he then goes after T-Bird. Um, Meanwhile, the gang that's controlling, or the people that are controlling this gang, Top Dollar, his girlfriend Mycia, and Granger, realizing that this is a problem.
Mm-hmm.
They generally, when they plan somebody's death, they prefer if they stay dead, and that's just not working out here. So they need to do something about
Especially
it.
the several times throughout the movie that they replan his subsequent deaths, and it's still not working out.
Yeah, it just doesn't stick.
The guy's just not a fan of dying.
Well, exactly, right. Um, but there's also an interesting subplot as well going on here. The couple had a young friend named Sarah, who they kind of treated like almost their kid sister. And when Eric and Shelley died, Sarah was kind of left to her own devices, with her mother Darla being a drug addict and an abuser, and not a very good human being. And we see them reconnecting. Meanwhile, Eric is trying to keep her safe, but not trying to be part of her life anymore, because he knows that deep down he's there for this revenge piece, and then he's done. But
He does want to help her life
get back on
as time
track.
goes on. Yeah, well, not necessarily
Yeah.
get on track, because it's not like he helps the mom, win lottery tickets or like sends her money like Robin Hood. It's more just like,
Well, he
I
does kind of
can't
help her get
provide.
clean.
Yeah, he uses his power somehow to take her entire addiction away.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't know if that's just because the writers had no idea how addiction works, or if it was more just like, no, that's how powerful this like ritual is. And I think the way that he helps the mom is like, I don't think the mom has ever had anybody stand up for her in her entire life as well. Like Sarah only had Eric, and then Eric died, and now Eric's back, and Eric, like she says it in the film, like, he's not my friend anymore. He has other things to do.
Yeah.
And it sounds really depressing, but like, we, the audience, know as well as Eric knows that he's got a limited amount of time. But in that time, takes steps to like set up dominoes that may or may not help this young girl. And that's the best he knows he can do
Hmm.
with the time he's been afforded.
And one of the other characters that he runs into is, I believe, is the cop's name is Albrecht. And that's an interesting relationship, because at first Eric's not really sure what to make of a cop. I mean, if you're on a bit of a revenge binge, you probably don't want to get too involved in the cops during that revenge kick. And yet, this is the cop that spent every last hour he possibly could with Shelley to try to be with her so that she wouldn't die alone. And that made a huge impact on, I think, both of them deep down, both Eric and Albrecht. And at one point, again, Eric uses his crazy crow powers to experience everything Albrecht experienced, so that he could be there and feel that and feel what happened there. And that's an interesting concept as well.
For me,
Um,
my whole thing with the powers themselves in this, honestly, the whole movie, the way I kind of thought about it was like, the way it starts out is it feels like these guys are like super into worshiping a devil, and they have this idea that if they do enough bad, they'll bring that devil back to earth. But I think like what this movie is telling us is that like, the devil never comes the way you want him to.
mm,
And so in this sort of essence, like, Eric is not necessarily a devil or a demon, but he is a ghost, a spirit, a disembodied spirit that has been called upon to, like, I don't know if
correct the
it's really,
behavior, I guess, almost.
I don't know if it's correct the behavior so much as it is like give them what they asked for. Like they're talking about how much like worshiping the devil is killing and it's sacrifice and carnage, and now they get to be the sacrificed and the carnaged. And I think that's like it's a play on that idea of you never get what you wish for.
Hmm.
And in this essence, like all of Eric's powers are more in the sense of a a disembodied spirit, a ghost trying to remember why he actually is here, what his mission is. And so when when he does the thing with the detective, it's humanizing himself from another person's perspective, which is something that a lot of people have always wanted. But like it also humanizes the detective, because I think what Eric's real problem with the police are is the same that anybody who grew up in the inner city is. It's like most cops are not your friends if you live in this neighborhood, whether no matter who you are, what you've done, or where you're going, they just don't trust anybody and they treat everybody bad.
Hmm.
And so I think that was his like standoffishness. And then now, as he's watching this cop actually do his job and watching this cop be pushed away from doing his job. Like he's seeing that like, oh, there are heroes everywhere, but the darkness is also everywhere and infects everything differently.
Hmm. So I do want to get into the religious aspects of this movie a little bit because you made an interesting comment about the devil piece, and I do like that. But there's another piece to this that is interesting, and I don't even know if the author knew this. In British mythology, there is a goddess called the Morrigan. She is symbolized by a crow, and she is the goddess of bloody vengeance.
I could see the author finding that out. I didn't
Right.
learn about Norse mythology until I started hanging out with Marines from different parts of the country that had actual like connections to it. And then I learned that it was more than God of War or more than what I had learned in lore.
Hmm.
And I could honestly believe, especially like what you personally have taught me about British witches and what I know about the chaplain in the military is required to learn something like 1,700 different denominations of faith,
Yeah.
and they have to know them in depth. And so I have no doubt that if the author wanted this information, he had actually surprisingly easy access to a good resource.
Well, exactly. But I thought that was an interesting way to view it as no, this kind of story is very plausible from a pagan perspective as well as from a Christian or an Abrahamic faith perspective as well. Because what we're both seeing is cause and effect, right? We're seeing that the cause being, we have people that are effectively invoking supernatural beings that they don't totally understand or care to understand.
And
And
well,
thus they've kind of almost gotten the attention of the supernatural world.
not just evoking supernatural beings, but engaging in supernatural chaos. Like going to war, fighting for your homeland, fighting for your property, that makes sense.
Hmm.
But killing to kill and using guns and knives, fire like superior forces, bribing officials, that's supernatural like evil. You are like actively doing more than is supposed to be authorized. And so now supernatural forces are like, well, if you want to play our game,
Yeah, then we're
like
going
let's
to
play.
start playing with you. Exactly. And I think we also see that with the character of Micah, which is was it Top Dollar's girlfriend? The relationship seems kind of weird there, but um she definitely seems to have a supernatural understanding of at least some sort and understands, for example, that the crow, is the key to dealing with Eric. That if they can stop that supernatural connection, they can possibly slow him down enough that killing him might actually be a thing they could pull off.
Yeah, and I think that's more illustrated by the fact that like she isn't seen as like the smartest character in the room at any point.
No.
And because of that, she doesn't have any like stable understanding of reality and physics. And so for her to make that leap, that like, oh, this is a supernatural being, he's probably got to have some kind of like connection to the natural universe. Oh, this crow has literally been here at every fight. Like the way it was written and displayed throughout the movie just made it obvious that if anybody was going to get it, it was her, because she wasn't like a lot of the male characters are more like, no, we're doing this because we're men and we're tough and we're like, it's the survival of the fittest. And so that's a very like dog eat dog mentality, which is structured in the fact that chaos is supposed to exist in the world at all times, which then takes away your belief in supernatural powers. And so if you can't believe in it, you're not going to think about it as something that's affecting the room, even when there's a supernatural fight going on.
Exactly. And
I really like how this movie set each character up with a full story. Like
yeah,
nobody was a one-off.
yeah, every character had their own background, their own specialty, their own
Their own
uniqueness.
purpose to the
Mhm.
narrative as a whole.
Exactly. And the fact that when Eric comes along, he turns each of their specialties on them,
Mm-hmm.
right?
He turns their strength against them, and like, but he doesn't use their strength as his own.
No, he basically, the failings that each of them have from their strength, he uses. And that's
Yeah.
an absolutely, very, because this isn't just a vengeance film, right? This isn't just, guy gets shot, comes back, starts shooting others. This is almost a supernatural vengeance film where the punishment is designed to fit the crime. And
And
that's an
it's
intriguing
designed to be grotesque so as to
dissuade.
dissuade everybody else from thinking that they can just now fill in that slot.
Yeah. I mean, you can imagine that after the events of this night, people would decide, maybe I'm not going to get into this level of insanity. Maybe, I'm just going to, it may be a little harder, but I think I'm going to try to earn an honest living now. Right?
Well, and maybe not even so much that part, like going straight to being a good person, but also like, well, maybe I'm not going to mindlessly kill people. I'm only going to I'm going to be tough, but I'm going to stop pulling the trigger whenever I want.
Exactly.
And it's sad, but sometimes like that's the best you can hope for.
Yeah.
Is like less people trigger happy.
Yep. I absolutely. Um, I think one of the other pieces that is interesting for me is that all of this is happening over the 3 days basically of Halloween. And from the Wiccan perspective, the veil between the world of the living and the world of the dead is thinnest during those days.
Hmm.
So the idea that somebody comes back actually plays out in a lot of publicly available rituals. There's actually a custom where the a as is available in publicly available rituals, the caster will open the doorway between the world of the living and the dead and invite the ancestors of the participants to come join them for a meal. And they will sit and have a meal with their ancestors' spirits that one time
It's
during that ritual.
it's so interesting how that's such a pervasive ritual, because it also it's an entire day. I want to say in Mexican culture, I can't remember if it's
Yeah,
entire
Deus
Latin
des
America.
Muertos, the whole Day
Dia
of the
de los
Dead.
Muertos. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and the Day of the Dead ritual is exactly that. You take somebody, a family member's favorite foods, drinks, and you leave them on the tombstone or leave them at um, a shrine that's made specifically for this event, and then from there you don't they it's not fully practiced that you're guaranteed to have some form of formal meeting or event occur, but it is more in the sense that, like, one of the things I remember learning is that if the Coke is flat, that's how you know you were
Yeah.
visited, because they took the essence of the Coke with them. And I think that's such a beautiful thing, is like you're acknowledging how hard death is, but
Hmm.
also acknowledging that the people you've lost are still with you.
Yeah. And I mean, even if you want to look at it from like a non-religious perspective, simply taking a day to pay homage, pay respect, honor the memory of those that came before you,
To
I think is a very,
remember
yeah,
those that came before you.
yeah, just the day to remember and to think about those that have passed. Um, and remember, keep that memory alive for yourself can definitely be a very powerful, very strengthening experience to just decide, okay, this is the day I'm going to do that. Right.
And to do it every year is to also start to create a celebration of death in not a grotesque fashion, but more in a
An acceptance kind
I
of way. Yeah.
acceptance and an acknowledgement that it's gonna happen, and on this day somebody will come to remember you as well. And I think that's why it becomes national holidays, and I think that's why it should always be a national holiday, because it
Absolutely.
helps. Like, even if you don't understand the spirit at a young age, one day when you start losing people, you really start to enjoy the spirit more than the events. And
Absolutely.
I think that's something to remember. And I think it's
Hmm.
sad that American commercialism has killed that part of Halloween because
Well,
of fear.
I don't necessarily know if it's the commercialism that's done us in, but I do think that part of it was an attempt to make it less scary for those that weren't ready to handle that side of things. And in that
Well,
regard, I do think that's reasonable, right?
well, I say it is more the commercialism because the commercialism led to the entertainment, and the entertainment is all about scaring, and it takes
Fair.
almost entirely away from, like, Halloween is supposed to be the Christmas of death, right? Like, it's
Hmm.
supposed to be a, not necessarily like this is the best day to have your funeral, but this is the best day to remember all the funerals you've been to and all the things you said you'd promised them. Like, if you have like a lifelong promise, or if you lost somebody and you're like, on their deathbed, I promised them that I would be a better person. Well, now Halloween is the day that you remember all those promises. And that's supposed to be the more spiritual aspect of the day. But
Yeah.
due to commercialism, that's the part that's been most ripped from it. Like, the death is still there, the fear is still there, the horror is still there, the darkness is still there, but the spiritual, recognizing the importance of all of your loss and how much it impacts you, how much it matters to you, that's what's been stripped away due to commercialization of the event.
True. So
And
I
there's
guess
no major force, backing up. Like, everybody on Christmas time, everyone's like, no, it's about Jesus, no, it's about spirit of giving. But then on Halloween, nobody's like, no, it's about acknowledging death and how important it is to acknowledge death.
yeah, I mean, we often hear about, um, let's put the Christ back in Christmas. You know, I guess let's put the witches back in Halloween. Like the actual witches,
Yeah.
not the green warty ones, right?
Well, let's put the elder witches, and if you have the green warty ones and the kids, like, that's
That's
adorable.
fine
But
and it's cute, but
it's the same thing as like kids dressing up as Catholic priests and nuns. Like,
yeah.
it's an event for dressing up, but let's also, like, let's bring out the elder witches to tell us the history of it, to tell us the importance of it, the importance of reverence for
Hmm.
death.
Yeah.
Let's-
Well,
I
one of our
feel like
big
that would be
things is that
amazing.
yeah, one of our big things has always been that in our rituals we try to include equal measures of mirth and reverence because it should
Mm.
be fun, but it shouldn't just be fun.
Yeah, and that's it's funny because that's something that actually relates a lot to the Marines is we have every year we have the Marine Corps Ball celebrating November 10th, 1775, and the day that we were born as an organization and as a brotherhood. And on that day, it starts out hyper formal. Not everybody gets to celebrate the ball the day of, but they have their ball within about a week or 2 week period of it. And on the day of the ball, everybody is dressed in their ultimate dress blue alphas, which is the uniform of uniforms in the hierarchy of the uniforms. And everybody brings their date who's dressed to the nines. Like this is it's better than prom because most people are over 21, so you're getting lit and nobody can get mad at you for it. And that's the part is
And you
it
can kind
goes
of
from this,
appreciate it now, right? As opposed to high
oh,
school.
dude, even well, I had a fun high school prom, but I've been living like a Marine since long before I was a Marine, and then when I was a Marine, and now after I finally quit, I slowed down. But the ball itself starts with this very formal ritual. We acknowledge the oldest Marine in the unit and currently still alive because once a Marine, always a Marine, whether you're active or inactive. And that's the thing about the ritual is we acknowledge the oldest, and then we also bring up the youngest. And for 1 year, I actually had somebody in my unit that was 17.
Oh
So like
wow.
we had somebody that was 17 and somebody that was like pushing 40, which in the Marine Corps is the same as in like athletics. Pushing 40 in the Marines is you're dead or a general. Um, and this dude was like I want to say he was a master gunnery sergeant. So he's
Wow.
enlisted and basically dead and still not at middle age.
Yeah.
But and that's the beginning of the evening. And then about an hour after dinner, it's all no holds barred. We're going to this area. You already have your hotel paid for. You already know where you're sleeping. We'll see you guys on Monday. And and it goes crazy for 3 days. And like 1 year I spent it in South Carolina, and it was at a beach I'd never been to in a resort area that I'd never been to. And then suddenly I'm having the biggest party I've ever had while also the most important ritual ever. And
Hmm.
that's I think exactly what you're describing about the importance of mirth and reverence is start with the reverence, start with the deep, and then that way everything from there is cathartic.
Exactly. Exactly. And I guess the other piece that we do have to touch on is that there is a fair bit of controversy with this film, and that is, of course, the death of Brandon Lee while filming this movie. Um, the way I understand the story of the official account was at one point they were using live rounds in this gun, and a bullet got jammed in the barrel. Then, when they had unloaded all the guns of any real ammo and loaded in blanks, the blank had enough power behind it to dislodge the jammed bullet, and that's what actually killed Brandon Lee. That's my understanding of how things went down.
And
And
that's what I've heard as well.
yeah, now as a positive, this has led to far more stringent safety guidelines for firearms on sets, which I think we can all be thankful for. Nobody ever wants to see an actor being inadvertently killed in the while trying to film a
Any
movie.
member of the
Uh,
production set,
Well, absolutely right, and I mean,
like camera
I th-
people.
well, yeah, exactly right. Like certain camera people that we've seen recently why it's important to
But
follow
gun
these safety
safety, it's
guidelines.
so important for the all audience. Anybody that's listening, there are 4 rules to gun safety. It's treat, never, keep, keep. Treat every weapon as if it were loaded. Never point at anything you do not intend to shoot. Keep your fingers straight and off the trigger until you are ready to fire. Keep your weapon on safe until you intend to fire.
Yep. I mean,
4
when I
rules
was yeah,
forever. Memorize them. And it has a sweet little like phrase, treat, never keep, keep.
yep. And honestly, that's a solid philosophy to deal with, I think, with anyone. I think you and I are both big proponents of responsible gun ownership and use. Um,
I believe you have to, anything that can kill needs to be respected as if it can kill, whether it's a knife or a gun.
yeah, heck,
When you
man.
have lives around you, you are holding a killer, not
Mhm.
necessarily an object that will kill, an object capable of killing. Respect that
Hey,
and respect the
absolutely.
lives around you.
Absolutely. Look, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, every tool deserves the appropriate respect. You can beat somebody to death with a rolling pin. So, show the appropriate precautions. Don't threaten somebody with a rolling pin unless
You can also
you've
break somebody's foot if you drop a rolling pin in the kitchen.
that's it, right? I mean, any tool can be used or misused, I should say. Any tool can be misused, and it's up to all of us to use them responsibly. And I hope that
And some
winds
of
up.
them have much worse repercussions and therefore need to be respected every single time as if it's the first time.
And I think that is the hopefully everybody's number one takeaway from the tragedy involving Brandon Lee is we need to show the appropriate respect and care when dealing with anything dangerous. And I do hope that's the takeaway here. And I hope that keeps going in that regard. I hope that's a lesson we don't have to learn routinely. Um, it should be an incredibly rare event, if ever. And,
Wait,
I think the more we
to
cut
me,
away
it's,
safety, the more risks we take, right?
well, to me, it's, it really, especially like in America where guns are so readily available. And it's from, you've made me aware, Corey, on it. Canada has more strict rules on access to the first purchase, but once you basically have guns, the people that have them, and most
Yeah.
people have them depending on the area you're in.
Yeah.
And so, in that essence, it is truly your duty as a parent, if you know that you live in an area where guns are, to teach your child weapon safety. And if you don't know what weapon safety is, there are tons of classes. Even if you never want to own a gun, go get a concealed carry permit because they'll teach you more about gun law and gun safety than anybody ever could. And
Mhm.
it's a class, and it's something that you can use to teach your children, to protect your children, because the first line of defense for any life is the parents. And then once they're over 18, it's now the individual. And on the individual, if you have gun safety, if you know gun safety, or if you just have reverence for what a gun is capable of, you're going to be more, or you'll be less likely to have any form of incident with a gun. And in terms of gun safety, that's the one time I wholeheartedly believe it's not assault. If somebody is messing around with a gun and completely risking other people's lives because you treat every weapon as if it is loaded, knock them out. And if anybody has a problem with it, they're wrong. That you don't swing a gun around ever. And if you
No.
get hit for swinging a gun around, say thank you for, making me smarter,
Yeah. I
because
mean,
it's a
personally,
gun.
yeah. I mean, personally, I've always felt that I mean, I'm in a different position here, but when I did live in the US, what I invested in instead of a firearm was a taser and a set of night vision goggles. And here was my logic. I knew that I wasn't a good enough, I'm a fairly decent shot, right? And again, I say fairly decent. I can take the tack out of that's holding the target up at about 150 yards with like a 22, right? That's not bad, right?
That's really good. No, grand scheme, man, there was a time in the Marines where you would get paid an extra like $1.50 if you could hit the target 100 times out of 300.
Yeah. That I could
Hit,
probably
hit.
handle. Yeah, I could probably handle that. But I knew that I wasn't necessarily sure I was going to be that good a shot in a crisis. But what I figured was this: I need the night vision goggles to see what the heck is going on. So if somebody breaks in and it turns out to be, my dad coming down to visit, and he's, just used his key to get in because it was late. If I couldn't see well and I shot him, I could inadvertently shoot my dad. If I tased him, he might get mad at me, but he's still going to get up afterwards. I might not get up after he gets up, but
Well, see, and that's why there's this awesome loading method, and it's for home safety shotguns. It goes bird shot, slug, bird shot, slug. The first one, it's going to irritate you, but you should survive unless it's too close. Second one's going to put a hole through you in your neighbor's fridge. And the third one, well, that's
yeah,
if nobody paid attention to the second one.
yeah, fair enough. But
And you
that's
don't
my
want to do it again.
yeah, but that was my logic, right? To make sure that if I drop somebody and it turns out to be somebody I didn't intentionally drop, I'm not killing them. And that was my logic.
Yeah, and I think I don't like the idea of people just telling others to just go get a gun because of how important it is to have gun safety and have weapon safety and have weapon awareness. And then on top of that, I think it's so important to like I think owning a gun is not as intense as owning a dog, but should be taken as intensely.
I agree with that. I think
You
that's a good way
should
to look at it.
you should train with it. You should get to know it. You should take it apart. You should figure it out. You should know every single thing about it, where its pieces are, where everything is to it,
Well,
where its
except
locks
for a
are.
dog. Please don't take apart your dog.
Well, take apart your dog's mind in terms of
Oh,
teaching
okay,
them and
fair enough.
training them and like analyzing. Like when I say take apart, I meant
I'm
breakdown, but
kidding,
I word
but
slipped.
yeah.
But yeah, so like getting to know your again, you said tool. I think that's such a perfect way to describe it because while it is capable of killing, it's also capable of protecting. It's also capable of scaring, which in
Mhm,
some cases is all you need to protect.
mhm.
And so it's a tool used to protect. So therefore, it should be, regarded as something capable of doing damage. Even even if you can't figure out the importance of human life, it is super hard to fix a gunshot hole, like a hole in anything that's been shot. So like don't mess around with guns.
Yeah. I mean, the way it was always explained to me as a kid, and again, you got to remember, Army father, Navy nurse as a mom. The best way they described it, I think, was this: that yes, gun ownership is a right, but rights also come with responsibility, and you can't divorce the two. Every time somebody has tried to divorce rights and responsibilities to those rights, we've had disaster.
You have the right to own a gun, but as long as you maintain the responsibility of owning it ethically.
Exactly. That's exactly it. And I think that's the most important lesson that we can take away from any sort of firearm mishap like this. And I think that was
And
brilliantly said.
the worst part for this mishap, man, is it's the worst.
Hmm.
It was a jam that most people would never like. If you see a gun's jammed, you're just going to assume it'll be jammed forever because it's a bullet. Like it's shooting at 1,000,000 miles an hour. How could it like stay unjammed? But it's a gun,
That's
even if
it.
it's a jammed gun.
It's still a gun. Yep. I agree.
It's always loaded, even if
Hmm.
it's not. Even if it's fake rounds, it's loaded with rounds. Like I've heard of people actually dying from blanks being shot too close. It's
Yeah.
enough concussive pressure.
Yeah. I mean, that doesn't surprise me at all. Right. Um, and I mean, I am going to get into a little bit of the woo woo and supernatural in this
Mm,
because,
there
you know,
is talk of
there,
the studio itself being haunted prior to these events.
well, there's more to it than that, actually. Now, I've actually, when David Carradine was alive, I actually was very familiar with him. I was actually in a couple of episodes of Kung Fu: The Legend Continues as an extra, way back in the day. And
Celebrity.
no, not even. Um, and I happened
Shameless
to get an
plug.
opportunity to meet David Carradine.
Hmm.
And I actually got to talk to him about a whole lot of weird stuff over the years. And one of the pieces that we talked about a little bit was the Lee family curse. Because at the time there was a rumor floating around that, look, Bruce Lee died on set, Brandon Lee died on set. Both of them were incredibly improbable accidents that occurred. Was there something to this? And I just casually mentioned this to David Carradine because he knew Bruce Lee and he was very familiar with Brandon Lee, and they were in the same, ran in the same circles and whatnot. And when I mentioned this, David Carradine goes unbelievably pale, like just a complete ghost white. And he says to me, I understand your curiosity. If I didn't know what I knew, I'd be curious too. Don't look into it. Don't ask questions about it. You do not want to be involved. If you know
Hmm.
about this, you're vulnerable.
Hmm.
So that always made me kind of wonder and very curious. It could have been David Carradine pulling a young kid's leg, right? Just trying to mess with him a little bit or start controversy. And yet, the Lee family was a very spiritual family. There was talk from Bruce all the time about him putting up good luck charms and what have you. So, is there something to a Lee family curse? I don't know. But I think it's interesting.
I think it's very interesting, especially when you couple onto Asian, especially Northern Asian spiritualism. No, like especially China and Japan, like they have some of the craziest ghost stories and the most dedicated of hauntings I've ever heard of. Like it
Mhm.
is unnecessarily terrifying.
Right. And for those of you who have never actually been to anywhere in Asia, it's important to understand the difference in how their culture treats spirituality versus what North Americans are used to. Because for us, we have it very separated. We have effectively church and state, even in places where the separation of church and state isn't necessarily enshrined. We kind of have, they're we still have that separation mentally. But there, as far as they're concerned, they're just the visitors in a supernatural world. The concept of spirituality being divorced from everyday life is just non-existent. It's always part of everything. And
Yeah,
it's always just kind of this background hum that they just show the appropriate respects and kind of move on.
this isn't really meant to be wishy-washy or glossing over anything, but to me the best way to generalize or sum up their relationship is they were atheist long before any of us were Catholic. And so they went through their hippie phase while we were going through our Catholic phases. And now they've grown out of being a hippie, but also never the religion of being a hippie more than anything is about independent relationship with nature, spirit, mind, and body, and then the world's spirit, mind, and body. And so they've just always had that relationship and now grown into being adults that also still know where they fall in the hierarchy of natural versus supernatural and
Mm-hmm.
know different rituals to protect themselves. Because, like in Japan, I was stationed in Okinawa, and the Okinawan people are so much different than Tokyo Japanese people,
Yeah.
but it's a lot along the same lines of like Northwest America versus Southeast America. like completely different accents, completely different opinions of each other, but basically still a lot of the same heritage and history as a whole. And so a lot of their faiths resemble each other, but then you see that Eastern Southern, or that Southern Northern switch where like their relationship is much different, to the point that it's a part, like a lot of their good luck charms are ingrained in their architecture,
Yeah.
and it's a part of just normal place, that like you see these things and you're like, that's cute, I should do that to my house. And then you go and like look up why they did it in the first place, and you're like, wow, that's a 14,000 or like a 1400-year-old tradition to keep bad spirits, and it's also a really cool design in the modern day. I'll get some sushi dogs. Like, that's awesome.
That's it. That's it. I mean, and that's so the fact that there's a potential for this kind of family or bloodline or what have you curse there, right? I mean, I think it's entirely possible that they believed it, right? I mean, I've never gotten the opportunity to analyze anything like that myself. I'd love the opportunity to. But I 100% believe that it's possible they believed there was something like that, and whether that affected their state of mind throughout this, who's to say?
Mm.
But I do think it's interesting. I thought it was worth bringing up. Um, Listen, Pollo Zapatos, thank you so much for coming out and being part of this. As you know,
Absolutely.
I always end my videos the same way. And if you'd like to join me on it, you are more than welcome to. But I think this video is over. Merry meet, merry
Very
part,
part.
and merry meet again. Take care, everybody. Bye bye.